Welcome to this very special edition of Meat Matters, where we will be hosting all of the guest speakers from the 2020 Cattleman's Conference. The incredible team at the South African Feedlot Association has made this possible in order to adhere to COVID-19 regulations.
We've arranged a lineup of top South African specialists in their fields who will give us insights and advice on this year's theme, compartmentalization.
Now, through my understanding, compartmentalization could be a very important direction for the South African beef industry to take in the future. Now, Diewold, please explain what compartmentalization is and what it means to this great industry that we have.
Well, Mac, to start off, I think we have to look at the academic portion of it, and we look at what the OIE, the definition that the OIE gives to compartments. It says that a compartment means an animal subpopulation contained in one or more establishments, separated from other susceptible populations by a common biosecurity management system and with a specific animal health status with respect to one or more infections or infestations for which the necessary surveillance, biosecurity and control measures have been applied for the purposes of international trade or disease prevention and control in a country or zone. Now, I don't know if you understood that, but no. I have understood nothing of that. All I can tell you is that compartmentalization coupled with traceability would have an immense effect on our international trade, and it would give us the opportunity to explain why our meat and how we operate with our meat are the best or amongst the best in the world.
You're still trying to explain it to me, but I think we need someone else to do it for us.
I agree, 100%.
So let's rather bring in Dr. John Gruwer.
Brilliant man for the job.
Coming up next, Dr. John Gruwer. Now, please welcome our first guest, Dr. John Gruwer from JData, who is here to discuss compartmentalization in the red meat industry.
Hi, John. Welcome. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah, well, thanks.
John, please tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where do you come from, where do you work, how many children, blood type, all of that.
Dear well, I'm a veterinarian by trade, but I've got a special interest in epidemiology, which is the study of sort of diseases within animal populations. And this project that we've done together was effectively to scope whether compartmentalization is feasible within the red meat industry, and quite specifically the work that I did was more towards the feedlot environment within the red meat industry.
Now, I've read the document, obviously the scoping document, but please tell us a little bit more. What was the finding? What do we say about compartments specifically in the red meat industry and the feedlot industry per se?
I think the bottom line is compartments definitely are feasible, but definitely within your industry, there are definitely some challenges that need to get addressed. And I think it was a very good exercise to go through. Industry shouldn't go into make these type of decisions without sort of really thinking it through properly. And hopefully we've started that process together. The major things that I found was that compartmentalization is really driven by international guidelines, and in this case it's the OIE, which is the World Organization for Animal Health. They've given guidelines on compartmentalization, and that's something that the country really needs to adhere to if they want to make compartmentalization work. So I looked at those guidelines quite specifically, and then looked at some of the legal aspects of compartmentalization within South Africa, and then also looked at some of the examples of compartmentalization in other industries and within some of the legal frameworks that Dr. Major from the Department of Agriculture have put together. What I found out is that the major things that need to get dealt with within your environment is traceability of animals. Compartments are effectively creation of a subpopulation of animals that have got a different health status to animals around them. And in order to do that, you have to know where animals come from. So traceability forms a big part of the compartment environment. Surveillance is the other thing that, while it's very close to my heart in terms of the work that I do, in terms of compartmentalization, it's also very, very important, because you can't, as you can well imagine, you can't define two different levels of disease unless you're looking for the disease within the compartment. So that's very, very important.
Can I just maybe interject there? So I think what I'm hearing firstly is it needs to be, it's symbiotic. There's a relationship between, because you mentioned specifically traceability and surveillance. Now, these are two separate objectives. One is driven by industry and one is driven by government per se.
Yeah.
What I hear is that we've got to work together.
Yeah.
It's a hand-in-hand situation.
I mean, that was one of the major findings in my executive summary that I did for you. The process cannot work unless you've got a very, very strong relationship with government as an industry. And luckily, the OIE have also put guidelines in terms of that relationship, and that's called PPP, Public-Private Partnerships. And that's something that is becoming a worldwide phenomenon just because of the environment that we are in economically. Governments have come to the understanding that public-private partnerships are the only way for us to progress as industry and as government. Governments don't have the money or the capacity necessarily to undertake these big projects that the industry have got a very big need to have undertaken. So they have to work hand in hand.
Well, compartments, is it a pie in the sky or is it actually doable in South Africa? And secondly, have it been done in South Africa? Has it been done in Africa for that matter?
So it's definitely been done in South Africa. Currently within the pig industry and in the poultry industry, there are compartment models which are getting used. So day-to-day, on a day-to-day basis, but not without their challenges. For instance, in the ostrich industry, compartmentalization is legislated within their agreement with the European Union, but the rules regarding the compartmentalization make it almost impossible to actually adhere to. But certainly the pig industry have made very good use of it in South Africa. Is it possible for the red meat industry? It is possible. There are some challenges when it comes to traceability, when it comes to sourcing animals. You've got a much more dynamic industry than industry like a poultry or a pig industry, a lot more players that are involved. So certainly the type of analysis that needs to take place in terms of the social component of how people adhere to regulations, how people adhere to industry-driven initiatives is something that really you need to have a very, very close look at, because those are the things that are going to make or break compartments in your industry.
Now, John, after hearing everything you said, obviously the question would be, what is step one? Where do we start with this?
Yeah, so Dewald, I mean, I think the important thing is to start small. I come from a systems background, and invariably the knee-jerk reaction is to sort of make this big system and make a big shell and then work into that. But in your case, that's not going to work because it's quite a dynamic environment and there are quite a lot of variables that are unknown. So I would really start with some of your big players within the industry, approach them, discuss with them how compartments work and what needs to get done in order for it to work. And then actually literally go and do a pilot study with them for traceability, for disease surveillance, what resources are available to you from a veterinary perspective, what resources are available from the government in those areas, because obviously with the public-private partnership, the government are very, very involved. So I think once you've done that with some of your big players, then you can see, is it feasible, has it worked with them, and then you work towards the rest of your industry, and I think that's the approach to take.
I'm just going to jump in over there quickly. It doesn't sound like it's an easy kind of a step to do. It sounds like it's more educational and it takes a long time, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and that's the thing sometimes we forget as vets, as regulators, is that the psychology behind approaching a really big project like this is really something you can't avoid. So you really, on your team, you need to include some social scientists, how people react to change, how are they going to be open to it? Do they see the benefit in it? If you're trying to put a system in place that doesn't have benefit, then you're wasting time. Even there must be perceived benefit for your stakeholders across the board.
I think we're going to discuss to Dr. Sifison Dombayla later, just to look at what can the economy gain and what can the farmers gain and what can our agricultural economy with regards to red meat gain from such a system.
Wonderful.
And that was Dr. John Gruwer, Director at J Data. Thank you, John.
Thanks, no worries. Thank you very much for your time.
Here to provide us with veterinary perspective on compartmentalization, please welcome Dr. Sean Morris, veterinary surgeon from Octavocene. Welcome, Dr. Sean.
Thank you, Mac.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
I'm very well, and you, Dewald?
Well, thank you. Welcome, and please tell us who you are, what do you do, where you operate from, what's your claim to fame?
Dewald, I'm intimately involved in the feedlot industry on many more levels than what I ever thought when I qualified as a veterinarian. And hopefully on a daily basis we make improvements and we add a positive contribution to the feedlot industry in South Africa.
Sean, yes. So we've been talking this morning to Dr. John Gruer, and later on we'll be speaking to Dr. Mpomaja from the government. And what John said to us is compartments is definitely a possibility in South Africa. He also mentioned that it needs to be a collaborative effect or collaborative interjection between government and industry. You being on the ground, is it possible to have compartments? And if so, what's the first three things that we need to desperately look at if we want to compartmentalize?
Dewald, I think that compartmentalization is definitely something that's achievable. I think it's going to take a lot of willpower. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take, as you said, collaboration with the government on every single level. And my own framework for something that would be possible, and I am working very closely with the government on a draft document at the moment, would be to identify the facilities where I believe it could actually be put in place. And I think the first thing that anybody that wants to become registered as a compartment would have to recognize is that they're going to have facilities where one can quarantine incoming cattle. Once they've been quarantined, I think then we would be able to put a process in place where we would have been able to identify or mitigate risk with respect to any of the diseases that would impact on our export markets. And from there, we could then take them into a feedlot situation under and with the inputs of the local provincial veterinary services. And from there, the abattoir too would have to be recognized as an export status facility. As they say in English, miracles take 3 days and the impossible takes 4 days. This can be done. And we as South Africa need to believe we can do it, and we will make it happen.
There are so many role players in the beef industry. And I would think, and I'm asking you, it's not only one portion of, or only one role player in this value chain that needs to adhere to this. Is it the whole value chain? Is it from a specific section? How would it work?
Dewald, I think what we need to understand is we have a big gap in our beef industry, and that is animal identification. Okay? If we don't get that put in place, whether we want to or whether we don't, we're not going to even get off the ground. I think it's a very simple equation. In actual fact, it's very interesting that the Americans have a draft policy in front of Congress at the moment called the Animal Disease Traceability Program. Okay? President Trump, love him or hate him, has sent it back to Congress. He wants a proper system in place. And if our neighboring countries, being Namibia and Botswana, have been able to implement a system that gains them export access or access to markets that we're unable to attain, we can get it sorted out. We just need to find cooperation between everybody from the ground up to the penthouse suite.
What would be, I think, the biggest stumbling block on the ground with regards to this?
You know, we need unity. We need to find a system that suits everybody. We need to be responsible. We need to make sure that we don't have vested interests in the program. We need to be doing what's good for the country, not for ourselves. I think there's more than enough evidence to show that when you do for yourself, the country battles.
Correct.
Now, Dewald, a quick one to you, Dr. Sean. A bit earlier on, you mentioned quarantine. Now, what is the importance of, having these cattle quarantined?
Mac, if you want to see somebody's eyes light up and their blood pressure drop, tell them you have foot and mouth disease. Okay, I was intimately involved in the outbreak on the 1st of November. In actual fact, I was on the farm where the outbreak took place. And if you realistically look at the incubation period of this virus, which in fact is innocuous, it doesn't kill the cattle, doesn't affect the meat, it just wipes out our international trade. Incubation periods are imperative, just like the COVID, where people have identified that somewhere between 2 and 10 days you may be infective. Foot and mouth has an incubation period of up to 14 days. So we need to take 2 incubation periods to ensure that we don't have that particular disease within the cattle. Having said that, I come back to the traceability system, and I think at the end of the day, if we don't have traceability, we are going to battle. You can't do this job properly unless you can identify what you're dealing with.
Sean, we've previously heard from Dr. John Gruer that obviously there are examples of compartments currently in South Africa. The pork industry is one of them. What do you think about that?
Devalt, I think the pork industry are leaders, and unfortunately at this point in time, the beef industry are serious followers. The fact that they were able to implement and successfully manage their compartmentalization program has resulted in them opening up markets that they would never ever have had access to. And, you know, let's say a boer maak 'n plan. Okay, we need a plan.
Yes.
We need a workable plan, we need a practical plan, and we need to show our trading partners that we're serious. Okay, talk is cheap. It's the money that buys the cigars. And once we have a program in place, we need to sit down with all role players in the industry, thrash it out. Can this be achieved? Can that be achieved? Is this practical? Is it impractical? And I once again come back to the thing. We need to the traceability and the animal identification. We definitely, and that's where the pig guys are ahead of us. They have their hand on the pulse. Right now, I think our hand's looking for the pulse.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sean Morris, and thank you for all the information that you shared with us today.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Devalt.
Now, Dewald, how important is animal health in everything we do as an industry?
Of the utmost importance, Mac. Animal health obviously is the start of everything. The animals are our products, and it's important for us to ensure that these animals are healthy. And more than that, our interaction with the international organizations like the OIE is of the utmost importance. And we've got enough specialist people in South Africa dealing with that.
Now, animal health being so important to us, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Mpomaja from the National Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, who is here to discuss animal health under compartmentalization.
Good morning, Mpo. Welcome here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mpo, now tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What is your qualifications? Where do you come from?
As introduced already, I'm Mpomaja. I'm a veterinarian by profession. And I wanted to be a medical doctor as I was growing up, but changed my mind halfway through, which wasn't a pleasing idea to my unfortunately late father, but I guess he's made peace with that. I am responsible for animal health in the country, all across, and also for trade, market access, both inwards and outward, as well as all matters related to the health of animals in the Republic.
Wonderful. Mpo, I'd like to ask you a question, Dr. Maja. What are we currently doing, and how does our animal health currently look in South Africa?
We unfortunately are not looking that good. We have the potential to do better. Last year, if you remember well, we had 2 outbreaks of foot and mouth disease, which unfortunately meant that trade with livestock as well as livestock products was affected severely. We had what the OIE. The OIE is the World Organization for Animal Health that sets standards for animal health as well as trading in animals and products of animal origin. So we lost the foot and mouth disease status in January of 2019 when we had an outbreak. We are currently controlling and containing another outbreak in Limpopo that was reported in November. We are doing fairly well with the control of that, and hopefully at some point soon, we will be able to regain the foot and mouth disease-free status. With regards to other diseases, we are also doing fairly well, not as good as we could if we put harder effort into controlling diseases. The main diseases that still bother us remain things like brucellosis, which unfortunately is also a zoonosis, meaning that it affects people. And there's a few other diseases that we could do better if we put our heads together.
I think it's important to just touch on the fact that we don't have our FMD free status backed, and that has an influence on trade per se. What we as industry see is that this is a collaborative issue, and it's not a governmental issue or an industry issue, and we've got to work together to ensure that our herd is FMD free and all the other diseases, obviously that's the zoonosis as well. We're discussing the setup or the possibility of compartments, of isolating specific animals. Do you think it will be possible, and if it's possible at all, what would it mean in the health section or animal health per se? Do you have an idea? What do you think about it?
Compartments have been used extensively to contain and control diseases. They have also been used to promote trade, especially in areas or in situations where you cannot guarantee area freedom or zone freedom. So going the compartment route, I think, is a good idea, and most trade partners are warming up to the idea of compartments. So we should be driving that direction and making sure that we have compartments that are free of specific diseases, probably all diseases. And my idea is that if we have compartments everywhere in the country, bits and pieces of compartments, literally everywhere, it would improve the general health status, and eventually the whole country would be of a good animal health status.
I think, Mac, just to say something else here, I think at the end of the day, it's all about us, meaning industry and government, doing something. And I always say, aim small, miss small. But we've got to start somewhere and looking at the smaller things to do. What is very important specifically, I think also, is inclusivity. This mustn't be exclusive and excluding people who wants to be part of a system. I think we can do this, and we can do this together to create compartments, starting small, comply with some sort of compartments, and then explaining why do we do it and how do we do it.
Correct.
Now, how would compartments influence our national herd's health?
The whole aim of compartments is to have a population of a different health status to the population outside. So if we had compartments that are of a better health status everywhere in the country, small compartments everywhere, literally, it would translate to a better animal population nationwide. And I think that is what we need to be aiming for.
Brilliant. I agree with you. Wonderful.
Right, don't go anywhere. That's it from Dr. Mpomaja from the National Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. Thank you very much for making time, my lady, and go well.
Thank you for having me, and all the best with the conference.
Now, Dewald, as a major contributor to the South African economy, how could compartmentalization in our red meat industry help us grow the economy?
Mac, what we can do is we create actually a product at the end of the day that is very much sought after and that is differentiated from other products. It's like they say in King 4, comply or explain. So we'll have the opportunity to create something that we can sell, actually boast with, and we can sell it to the rest of the world.
Now, joining us to further discuss compartmentalization and the economy, please welcome Dr. Sifison Dombayla from the National Agriculture Marketing Council. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you very much, and thank you for welcoming me.
Sifiso, good to have you.
Likewise, man, I'm so happy to be here at Val.
Good. Sifiso, tell us about yourself. What do you do? You're a doctor now, recently. Congratulations. But what do you do? Where are you? And what does the NAMC do?
Thank you. Yeah, I think now we're getting used to this name, doctor. I think people started calling me back up Sifison after some time that I forgot my name. But I think to start off with, the National Agriculture Marketing Council is the agency of the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, which is now the new department I've merged with Agriculture and Rural Development. And I think it's an agency that plays a very key role in the agricultural sector, because as we know, during the deregulation of the sector, it is the agency that provides that administration and making sure that it even administers the statutory measures, which is the main instrument that is used by industries to continue collecting levies and finance the functions that are critical for the viability of the sector. But we also do a lot of work in terms of providing policy advice into the ministry, as well as to the stakeholders that are directly affected into the agriculture sector. So you could think of the National Agricultural Marketing Council as the agency that provides all the decisions that are required to keep our sector viable and be able to be prosperous going forward.
So, Sifison, we had Dr. John Gruer here this morning. We've had Sean Morris. We've had Dr. Mpomaja from the department here. And what we all said, and actually the conclusion we came to up until now, is that compartments is possible. But a portion of the compartments which we narrowly touched on was traceability. And traceability forms a portion or a subsection of this. Now, my question is, what would traceability mean for our economy as a whole, and how would it affect the emerging sector per se?
That's a very interesting one. And I think I wanna link it with the word I said earlier when I'm opening up on around the deregulation part during that phase. And I think having to institute the compartmentalization concepts, as well as institute the capacity to create our traceability into the sector, it will really have a strong spillover effect into our economy and as well as into our emerging farmers, to be specific. Now, let's give you why I say those things. Let's first understand that animal industry, red meat to be more specifically, it's an industry that is it's the biggest industry in the agricultural sector. And it can, even though it doesn't provide so much jobs at the primary level, but the spillover effect and its interlinkages with your manufacturing, which is your textile and other industries, it can have really a strong impact into our communities, into our rurals. Now, you mentioned the point to say, what impact would it have into our economy? First of all, if we be able to implement those concepts correctly, we'll be able to increase the confidence and be able to link those animals with the markets. And we can even enter into the export markets, which we can generate the foreign earnings that will help not only just our emerging farmers, but it will help our country, and it will help also to create a positive trade balance. So we see those concepts and we see those systems, especially the traceability, because it can assist to trace the animals and ensure that you create access into market. As we know, traceability nowadays, which links into the food safety, consumers are very particular to what they eat, where it comes from. And that system will assist us to bring that confidence of the consumers and be able to grow our animal sector, which is the sector that, if it grows well, it's not only just the animal industry. It will be able to even pull out our grain industry through the feed that it's used into our animal, through our feedlots. So I see it as a very critical industry. And those concepts that you talked about, which is your compartmentalization as well as the traceability, are just the enablers to achieve all these things that I'm talking about.
Dr. Sean Morris said it, and he referred to willingness. He made the comment that the people on the ground, the industry role players, needs to have the willingness to do this. Traceability, for example, and compartments. Do you see that there's a willingness? I mean, from your side, from the NMC side, have you seen this willingness?
What we're picking up, because at the NMC, we're sort of like a bridge between the private industries as well as the public sector players. And what is very encouraging is that we're starting to see an increased level of trust between the two worlds, if I can use it. I know it's a wrong thing to say two worlds because they're supposed to work together, you know. And for reasons that we all know coming back from the sector and the country where we come from. But certainly, I don't even think the willingness should be a question, because even the market dictates the willingness to be there. But what we want to see over and above just the willingness in terms of commitment of paper, we're starting to see even a strong commitment and targets where there even a willingness to commit the resources so that you can be able to create this traceability system that we need. But we're also starting to see commitment in terms of the infrastructure that is required, because the system on its own is just one, but you have to even revive some of the things that we have left to collapse. Like a simple thing as the dipping systems in the communal areas that can assist with information. And that's another area that is lacking, that we don't have credible information, particularly from the imaging side, which tend to affect the way you build your traceability system into the country. So that willingness, we're seeing it's increasing, and it's only our hope that it will actually just manifest and move from just being a commitment in the boardroom, but we see this system implemented and properly financed on the ground.
Yeah. I think the possibilities, maybe economically speaking, the possibilities is so big. I mean, if we look at traceability and compartments and the like, with regards to finance, I mean, you just mentioned it. If we can put in a system, and system is maybe the wrong word, but a product, let's say we produce a product whereby emerging farmers and commercial farmers, the like, can finance cattle rather to put up security on land, because and I think there's so many opportunities in South Africa, and there's so many opportunities in our world, and we need to maybe lift the veil and look beyond what the old traditional things were, how we operated, and we need to look at new things and see if it works. If it doesn't work, then we leave it. But I think there's many opportunities.
Absolutely. You know, I think this discussion is very opportune because we're having this discussion at a time where the different social partners in our sector are trying to really find a solution into our structural issues that have faced our sector, not only just the animals, but have really constrained growth in the past. And you just mentioned some of the very key ones. It just starts by understanding and increasing access to your factors of production, which is land. And I think for when we look at it, because some of the emerging farmers operate in your communal system where tenure security is an issue. But we started to see even from the policymaker side where they've produced some of the clarity in terms of the policies of how do you even allocate land, and those policies like the land beneficiary selection strategy, which is in the public domain. And these are just the building blocks that we all need, and also the infrastructure that I talked about earlier. But what is also key is that access into affordable capital, so that you build in farmers that are sustainable and are competitive and are linked into market, so that we even shift away from this, we even shift away from this strong dependence of the emerging farmers into the state, but we want to create a new crop of emerging farmers that can form strong partnership with their counterpart in the commercial sector, because they have the knowledge, they have the network that they can assist into the market. And if all those building blocks are put in place, absolutely we will be able to achieve and realize all these opportunities we talk about. And then the concept of compartmentalization, which deals now with the animal health and ensuring that the image of the country continues even if we have an outbreaks, it becomes now an explanatory tool that we are able to use when we continue expanding these export markets with our trading partners in the international market. So I guess what I'm trying to really say and emphasize is to really agree with you to say the opportunity is very immense into the animal industries. And it is an industry that holds the key not only to just grow our agricultural sector and our emerging and the commercial farmers to make them more profitable, but it can really revolutionize our rural economy, because almost every household in our villages have a cow or so. And how do you create that systems and make them to be market linked is really one of the key that we have to sort it out.
I agree. I think from my side, listening to you, one important question is, there's a saying that, every man for himself, God for all of us, right? How important is it with all these sectors that are available? How important is it as farmers in general to merge and become one and work together?
At least today we're talking to Deval, which is an animal guy. So let me show you one of our friends in the one of the industries that have done really well, and I want to show by example the question you're asking to say how important is that farmers work together. If we look in our country, and we look at our agricultural economy have grown almost double in volumes from 1994 to what it is today. But if you're looking at the fruit industry, they've actually done extremely well. And one of the golden ticket that the fruit industries have managed to do well is to be structured and to have one voice, ranging from the manner in which they open the markets, the manner in which they put this traceability system we're talking about, the manner in which they coordinated the information, and the manner in which they influence policy. And I think that is a function of credible institutions, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector, and those institutions working together. And I think for me, that's a golden ticket, even the industries like red meat and white meat and in livestock in general. If they can just build on that success that the food industry, I believe, they've managed to secure, will be a golden opportunity for the red meat industry. So it's so critical that they work together, because then you don't, when you have a system and you're working together, at least everybody comply with that. So you don't have leakages in the system which tend to affect your market and your image of it. And all that needs that every player must comply to the rule-based farming systems and be able to make sure that we all drive into one objective, which is the inclusivity that we want to see and the industry that are growing in the inclusive manner.
In agreement.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sifison Dombayla. Truly appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Sifison. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Now, as one of the highest red meat producers in the world, surely the export market is a very valuable sales channel for our industry. Maybe that's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Is that the case, though, Dewald?
Yes, you're correct. Traceability per se and our markets are very important to us. And I think the exports is a very, very big portion of it with regards to how we stabilize markets in South Africa. During this COVID period, we exported approximately 4% or up to 4% of our red meat. And that created stability within the country with regards to our prices and our outflow of our meat. So, yes, it's definitely important.
Now, here to discuss export opportunities with us, please welcome Mr. Martin Cameron, economist from Northwest University and Trade Advisory. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mac.
Welcome.
Thank you, David.
Please just tell us about yourself, who you are, where you come from, what do you do?
Well, obviously, the fact that I'm associated with the Northwest University was in the introduction. We are a spin-out company of the Northwest University, and we were actually developed to take the academic IP that has been developed over the last 25 years to help exporters identify realistic export opportunities, to put that into commercial practice to help industry and companies be more successful at exports.
Maybe a follow-up question on that is, who would you do work for specifically?
So we deal with, from a national perspective, your Departments of Trade and Industry, Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Nowadays, it's called, in acronym terms, DALRRD. And then also export sectors, such as yourselves, also in terms of the red meat, particularly the pork industry, and then individual companies. There are companies that want to develop their own export potential, and if they do it in the right way, they should look at facts, and that's where we come in. They approach us and we help them define and develop an export strategy that, in the most cases so far, have helped them to be more successful.
I don't know if you want to say this. Do you work only with national companies or international companies?
We actually do work internationally, so we have clients all over the world, and most recently we even managed to get the Australian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency for the state of Queensland to become a client of ours. And it happened to be that I was in Queensland when COVID hit, and we were doing a presentation, and suddenly the phone started ringing, and it was going crazy because China just closed their agricultural exports from Australia into China, and everybody was in a panic.
So, Martin, what we're currently looking at is, and we've had discussion this morning with regards to compartmentalization and with regards to traceability, but for an economist and sitting within the public sector and obviously advising, how does export really affect us? And maybe a follow-up question after that, which we need to look at, is where do we export to?
Okay. So first of all, the question about exports, I think people need to realize that individuals, human beings, trade. That's what we've been doing for thousands of years. And when governments start talking about closing down and protecting the economies, that's kind of counterintuitive and counternatural for human beings. We were designed and meant to trade globally and with each other, around the corner with a cafe or across the seas. So trade is very important, and in the South African context, we are one of the most open economies in the world. And if I say open, we look at a measure called the openness calculated by looking at total trade, imports and exports, relative to your production of your economy. We are close to 70% of our economy. When the economists call the number GDP and how big we are, people don't realize 70% of that, in South Africa's case, is related to trade, either imports or exports or both. So it's extremely important for South Africa as a market to continue to trade, because our domestic market is just way too small to grow and to create wealth for everybody. If we were only dependent on the domestic market, we would still be in the previous era of barter trade. Yeah.
And then obviously going forward, is we're looking at, obviously in the beef industry, I can say, we've heard, I'm going to name China, for example. We've got a big drive and a focus, and everybody's eyes light up when they hear there's a possibility of exporting to China. Is China the end goal?
Well, that's an interesting one, Dewald, and I think biggest always attracts the most attention, but biggest is not always best, especially depending on your capabilities in terms of production and delivery capabilities. So within the meat industry, red meat particularly, yes, China is big. Southeast Asia is big, as a matter of fact. But if you look at, we've developed a methodology to help identify, based on facts, where the what we call realistic export opportunities are. And if you actually look at that, a market like South Korea is better positioned for South African exports of beef, as an example, than, for instance, China. That doesn't mean that China is not a good market. The point is just that there is information, there is intelligence that can help us actually identify, in most cases, better opportunities than those that are the obvious ones. And unfortunately, most of the times, the so-called large ones are the ones that are obvious. There are opportunities in Eastern Europe, as an example, where consumption patterns and standards in terms of the way of doing business, etc., are much closer aligned with South Africa, for instance, than even the Far East and Southeast Asia. Yet we don't trade a lot with those markets, and they eat meat, and not only beef, but also pork, and even chicken. So in the Middle East area, for instance, Saudi Arabia is one of the largest markets. We supply very little to Saudi Arabia. Yes, there's the Muslim aspect to it as well, so you need to be in the position to produce and deliver in a halal way. And generally, for any food production in the world, if you don't produce halal, you exclude yourself from about 30% of the global population. So these factors all play a role, but the point is, if you look at the data and the information that's available, there are many what I call unusual suspects, the not so big, not so in-your-face opportunities, which we should be pursuing.
If we pursue, what have you seen? I mean, you just said you were in Australia when COVID hit. How are we, I mean, South Africa, perceived in the rest of the world with regards to, we say 70% of our GDP comes from import-export. How, if you can answer it, how do the rest of the world perceive us? I mean, for example, Australia.
Well, if we look at the particular question of Australia, if you followed in the media, Australia's biggest trade partner was China, and still is China. And the Prime Minister of Australia actually was in the forefront of accusing China of being negligent regarding the handling of information and reporting on the COVID crisis. And as a result of that, China started imposing bans against Australian, especially agricultural exports, such as the beef and other produce. They actually have actively started looking at finding alternative trading partners. And not only is that the case for Australia, but many American companies, there are a couple of surveys that one can quote, where they've actually said that now they have a strategy for China plus one. So they want more than just China as the base of production and supply, as well as a target market, because they were burnt in this instance with China. So that's where we have an opportunity. Everybody's looking for alternative partners in the new shuffle in the world trade. And as South Africa, we should be savvy about positioning ourselves to capitalize on this opportunity, because the reality of the matter is it's not going to come to us. We've got to go to the market. If we don't make the market aware of our products, they're not going to buy from us. You're asking the question, how do they view South Africa from a, call it, macro-political perspective? Not well at this point in time. That's the reality. And we can't get past that. We have had a track record over the last 10 odd years which was not conducive to improved relations with a lot of countries. But at the same time, I think the world is all sitting back at the moment and saying, COVID is here, we are in the new normal, we need to look at alternative opportunities, alternative relationships, and in that sense, now is the opportunity to foster and develop those relationships for alternative supply partnerships.
Now, I'm very sure that, the trade market, there are a lot of challenges behind it. Are there actually other trade markets that refuse to trade with South Africa? And if so, what is the problem and what is the solution behind that?
Oh, Mac, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Because the answer is yes, there are many problems. They change over time. They can happen overnight. Some of them are politically driven. Some of them are commercially driven. Some of them are vested interests driven. So the reality of the matter is trade is not for anybody. But at the same time, when you put yourself on the other side of the table and you're a supplier into a domestic economy that you are responsible for, you want to have sustainable partnerships, sustainable quality trade that's delivered on a regular and predictable basis. And I think most people are of nature wanting to have stability and willing to trade with you in a sufficiently substantial and sustainable way that it makes sense to build those relationships. Because make no mistake, it takes time and money to build the relationships. But at the same time, we have somebody like Donald Trump, which is, he's heading the most powerful economy, depending on who you believe and who you read, the second or the third or the first powerful economy in the world. And he can actually, at a whim, change a trade deal or take his pen and draw a line through it. So in that sense, it is also tough at this stage for exporters and international traders that the global arena is in flux. And Europe is up against China, Australia is up against China, the US is against China and everybody else. At this stage, they want to do their own thing. Interesting fact, the US, the measure of openness that I mentioned earlier, most people see the US playing a very big role in the global economic stage, and they do. But did you realize that they are extremely closed from a trade perspective? Only about 22 to 25% of their GDP comes from trade. So 80% of their domestic economy is driving their GDP. And that puts them in a position where most other countries can't be, that they are, to a large degree, self-sufficient on many, many fronts, which we are not.
Just a quick one before we wrap it up, just for interest's sake, right? Which country actually is at number one when it comes to the trade industry, especially when it comes to red meat? Who's sitting at number one? Where are we as South Africa?
So I think the first thing that you have to realize and that you have to ask Dewald is, what is red meat?
Yeah.
Because it's not one thing.
Yeah.
And in that game, there are different products, there are different markets that favor different products. As an example, which country in the world do you think imports the most goat meat? Our boerbokke?
Yeah.
Take a guess.
Australia.
Well, I was going to say South Africa, but then I'm
Imports the most goat meat.
That's a quick fire shot.
Kuwait.
I don't know. South Africa? Let's take a chance.
No, the US.
The US?
Yes. Did you know that the US took our boerbokke and they crossed it with Swiss goat's cheese bokke, and they made a new breed of boerbok that is now good for meat and for cheese.
Whoa.
Did you know that Australia came to South Africa and learned from us in terms of our boerbokke, and now they've got more boerbokke than us? And they are selling the biggest share of exports of boerbok meat goes into the Middle East from Australia. They've actually got what they call specialized halal processing zones to make meat and to take it into the Muslim markets.
I've been saying this. The other countries, to a great extent, comes to South Africa. They see what we do. They take it with money. Let's call it then maybe government money or funded money, and perfect what we do, and then they sell our ideas.
Well, I wouldn't say it's our ideas, but they've taken the idea and perfected it. It's similar to saying that the Japanese now are making such good cars because they stole the idea for making cars from America.
From America. We had the idea with
That's the idea with global trade. Yeah. Remember, it is a interchange and assimilation and improvement of ideas as well as products. That is what trade is about. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for technology that was evolved through the fact that people trade. So trade in that sense is good. It's not bad, and they don't compete with us. They're just better than us. and we need to improve.
And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That was Mr. Martin Cameron, economist from Northwest University and Trade Advisory. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you, Devil.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Meat Matters, where we discussed the Cattleman's Conference. We spoke to Dr. John Gruer, who told us that compartmentalization in South Africa is a possibility. We spoke to Dr. Sean Morris, who showed us that compartments could work if we have got the willingness to do that on ground level. Dr. Mpho Maja was here, and she said that government has got a willingness to work together with the private sector or industry. As a matter of fact, we've got to form private-public partnerships to work together. Dr. Sifison Dombayla from the NAMC was very clear on the fact that we could take our red meat products to the rest of the world, and we've got an outstanding product, which we have to do through inclusivity. Lastly, Mr. Martin Cameron showed us and told us about the opportunities that we have, not only in China, but the rest of the world. And I would like to thank each and every one of the speakers who were here and told us what we can do and how we should do it. We've got an obligation and a responsibility to become agile in our industry, to create or have to use the resilience that we have to make this industry the best in South Africa. Lastly, we've got our chairman, Mr. Louw van Reenen, to speak to us and do the closing address. Thank you.
Thank you very much for participating in the conference on the online platforms, and thank you for all the different inputs. I especially want to thank you and your inputs into the theme of the conference, as traceability is becoming more important for our industry for the future, and we hope to build on that.
Well, a big thank you to Mr. Louw van Reenen. Thank you, Dewald.
Thank you, Mac. It was good.
And thank you at home for joining us on another episode of Meat Matters, the Cattleman's Conference. Dim the lights.